Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Let's begin with the last chapter, that is Introduction to ReactJS. Now, in this particular video, we are going to see just an introduction to a JavaScript library called ReactJS. Now, this is going to be a very simple, brief introduction to React.js, and it will not be a detailed video. So it will be just giving you basic idea of how React.js works and how to make a simple app in React.js. So let's begin. First and foremost, this is a JavaScript library and it was developed by Facebook in the year 2013. One of some of the main reasons why we use React.js is because of its speed and the use of virtual DOM. It has reusable components. That means you can uh, convert a big project into smaller components which can be reused at multiple places. Also, because of its wide popularity, it has a very large community and ecosystem, and it has lots of additional resources from where we can learn and contribute to. Now, this is not the only library out there. There are other alternatives like Angular and Vue.js, but this is the most popular out there. Now, if you want to learn React.js in detail, this is the website react.dev/learn. Here you will get the details and detailed introduction and tutorials regarding React.js. So, first and foremost, let's understand how we can install React.js. Installing React.js, for to use React.js, you have two different options. First is the CDN, that is the content distribution network option, and second is using Vite. So let's look at the first method. The first method basically, if you want to use React in your website using CDN, you have to write or you have to include three libraries or three JavaScript files. The first one is the React file. This is the actual React library. Then you have to also include React DOM, which manages the virtual DOM and all the stuffs related to it. And finally, if you are going to use JSX in your code, then you have to add Babel to your CDN script tags. Okay, so these are the three script tags required. Then you can start a simple script tag, but the type should be text/Babel, and then you can start writing your JavaScript code. Okay, so what you see in this file, that is in this return statement, the thing that you see, this is JSX basically. Okay, what JSX is, we will see in some time. So this is a way of doing it using CDN. Now let's look at the Vite method. So in this method, you actually install, this is the most used method to use React in your computer. So first of all, obviously, Vite and React are JavaScript libraries. So to run it, you will be needing a JavaScript runtime environment. So for that, we have to install Node.js. So you can download Node.js from its website. Once you have installed Node.js, then this is the command npm create vite at the latest, and this is the name of the app. So whatever name you want, you can put that over here. Then the template should be React. Okay, even if you do not provide the template, that is fine. When you run the command, it will ask you which type of app you want to create. So the Vite is basically a general build tool. It can be used for uh, creating apps for any type of JavaScript library like Angular, Vue, React, anything. So in general, this can be used for any type of library. So once you run this command, the project will be scaffolded, and then you can get inside your scaffolded project that by using the cd command, cd my app. So whatever is the name of the app, same thing you have to put over here. Then you have to install all the required libraries using the command npm install, and then to run the code, run the React app, you just say run npm run dev. That's it. So this is these three statements have to be done only once for every project, and this is what you run every time you want to run your project. So this is the wait method. Now let's first understand why do we use React in the first place. So it's a very important question. All those who are appearing for theory exams on this, so this is going to be one of the important questions that comes in the theory exams. So React.js features. So there are many features. Let's list it out one by one. So the first one is component based architecture. So this is very important because whenever you make a very complex app, it's a good idea that you can divide those apps into smaller parts, so that if there is another part of the app where the same components have to be used, then you can use it with this. Okay, reuse the same components again. Like for example, if there is an app where if the app has the same header every in all the pages, then it's better you create a separate component of the header and then reuse it everywhere else, right? So that is the advantage of using component based architecture. Second, it uses JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. So the advantage of JSX is that inside JavaScript you can write HTML like code. Okay, so that is very important because when you work with JavaScript, creating HTML elements is a bit tedious task, because you have to use the create element function, which can be sometimes very difficult to do, and it is where it reduces the readability of your code. So once you start using JSX, it will look similar to HTML. So it gives us a much more control over our UI. Third feature, virtual DOM. So usually when you work with JavaScript, when you try to change any part of your DOM, the entire page is redrawn. Okay, so everything is redrawn. But in React, the DOM is not touched directly. A virtual DOM is created of the actual DOM, and then whenever some change happens, you first compare with the virtual DOM which part is getting changed, and only that part is updated rather than changing the entire DOM. Okay, so that makes that improves the performance quite a lot. Then one-way data binding. So one-way data binding is another feature of React.js. So the data always flows from the parent to the child. Okay, so this is something we have to understand here. There are certain frameworks like Vue.js where there is a two-way data binding, where the if there is a parent and inside the parent there is a child, then the child can also change the data of the parent, and the parent can also change the data of the child. So this is what normally happens in two-way data binding. But in case of one-way data binding, the data always flows from the parent to the child. Okay, it is not the reverse. Okay, so the child cannot uh, uh, cannot transfer data to the parent unless there is a shared state. Okay, so if there is a shared state from the parent to the child, only then it can share the data. So because of this one-way data binding, it is easier to debug the code which when we write a JavaScript component. Next, declarative UI. So whenever we deal with states in case of React, it has a declarative UI. That means whenever the state changes, it updates all the components related to it automatically. Okay, that is one of the features of React.js. Another very important feature, React hooks. So React hooks are a special type of functions which allows the React functional components to interact with the state and life cycle methods of the app. Okay, so there are different hooks that are available, like use state, use effect, use context. So we will see this in detail in the further slides. So next is unidirectional data flow. So this we have already seen, that is one-way data, the one-way data binding. So it is the same thing. Then rich ecosystem and community support. So because it's a very mature library, so it has lots of tools which we can use to make it better. Especially my personal favorite is the React router, Redux, and especially Next.js, which is a full stack framework which is built on top of React.js. Let's move on to another important topic in this, that is JSX. So JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It is basically it's just sugar coating the the JavaScript so that whatever you write, the UI that you create, it looks much more like HTML, so that you don't have to mess up your code by writing create elements and all those JavaScript part, and to create a simple UI. Okay, so this will make a little more sense once I show you an example. So let's look at the example now. So let's suppose you want to create an h1 tag. Okay, now if you do not use JSX, then the way you do it using pure JavaScript is you have to do JavaScript and React obviously is to do create element. You have to call a function called create element with the type of the tag, that is h1, and what contents do you want in that. Okay, and this will create an element. Now imagine you have to create 10 elements like this. Okay, so this will create a lot of what do you say, unnecessary code in your JavaScript files, right? Now look at the same thing. We want to create an h1 tag, but with the help of JSX. So this is how it looks. It looks exactly like as if you're writing an HTML code. This is not HTML, but it is JavaScript XML, right? So we are creating a simple h1 tag, but it literally looks like as if we are writing a HTML code. Okay, so that is what this JSX does. So how does JSX work? Okay, so you create your UI with the help of JSX. Obviously it is not HTML, but it looks like HTML. So since it is not an HTML, so but the browser needs an HTML to run, right? So there has to be a transpiler or JavaScript compiler which converts or which transforms these JSX code into corresponding React create element calls, right? So that is done by a JavaScript compiler called Babel. Okay, so the Babel code, so it like for example over here, this hello.jsx file is given to the Babel code, which converts and converts it into the JavaScript code, that is hello.js. So it converts everything, whatever elements that you create, into a create element calls. Okay, so now when the browser reads it, it can easily understand what that code is. Okay, now there are certain rules that you have to follow when you write JSX. So whenever you return a JSX from a function, you have to always remember that it can return only one parent element. Okay, so like for example, look at this code. Now here it is returning an h1 as well as a paragraph tag. So this is not allowed. It can return only one element. Like for example here, so if you want to return h1 and paragraph, first you uh, put it inside a div and then you return that div. So this will help us in so this will remove that problem. Okay, it will now return only one parent. Second thing, you have to close all the tags. So none of the tags should be left open. Okay, so like for example, an image tag, usually in HTML we don't close it. It is self-closing. But in React, you have to close each and every tag. Okay, even self-closing tag needs to be explicitly closed. Then if you want to, the last one is if you want to enter any variable inside JSX, then you have to use curly braces. Okay, so when you add curly braces, it shifts from JSX to JavaScript. So there you can put any JavaScript variables over here, okay, inside the curly braces. So these are some of the rules that you should know while writing JSX. This is a JSX example. Okay, so here I'm creating a component called welcome, and inside that welcome component I have created a variable called student, which is storing a value Mira. And now this is the JSX that I'm returning, and here I'm writing in an h1 welcome React, and here I'm just printing the name of the student. This is simple JSX. So now once we understand what JSX is, now we can get into components. Okay, so what are components? So when we make bigger apps, so when we start making bigger apps, then there comes a point where the to make the app manageable, we will have to divide the app into smaller components so that those components can be reused at multiple places, right? So that's what the entire idea of component is. Okay, so converting your bigger app into smaller reusable UI components that can be used multiple times. Each component has to be made in such a way that is independent, that component is not dependent on something else, and handles its own logic and design. Okay, so it should not be like that. If you create a component, it should not depend on someone other. So that means, for example, if you create a component for, let's say, calculating an area of something, and the formula for calculating the area is somewhere else, defined somewhere else, that is wrong, right? So everything related to that component should be inside that component. Okay, now obviously a bigger component can be again further divided into smaller components, that is allowed, but that all should be that all should come together and should complete the UI, so that everything works together. Okay, so basically you can think of it like all these components forms like a Lego blocks. When you put the Lego blocks together, you can combine them and build a proper app. So what are the types of components? So components can be made in two ways. It can be either functional component or a class component. Okay, so when in the older times when we used to make React apps, we used to use class-based components, but nowadays we don't use class-based components. We prefer using functional components. Okay, so when we work with class-based components, the life cycle method, the state handling, everything is slightly different. But when we work with functional components, for all the additional elements that we want, we have to be dependent on hooks. Okay, so we will look at what hooks are in some time. Okay, so let's understand how components work. Okay, so how you can create a simple component. So first let's create a welcome.js file. Okay, so we will take a look at this welcome.js. This is a simple function which returns some JSX, let's say hello student. Okay, and this function is now exported. Okay, a default export, this function is exported. Now in the app.js, this is the actual file which gets rendered. In this, we are first importing the welcome component that we have created, that is this component. And when we want to add that to our app, we just put it like any other tag that we have. Okay, so we will just write welcome, and this will add that component to our final UI. Okay, so now when we run this app, we will see in the app .js, when we render that, we will see hello student as the output. Now it's not that we can also send data to the component. Okay, so it's not always that the components have to be static. Okay, if the components are static, then it doesn't make much sense to reuse the component, because the component will always look the same, right? Like for example, in this case, the student component is there, right? Now if the student component is always going to print the same thing, then the usability of the component is less. So then what to do? So I can add props as a parameter over here, and when I pass when I call the student component, I can send some attributes to this component, and these attributes will be appearing in the props like objects. Okay, so if I say name attribute, it will come here as props dot name. The roll number will come here as props dot roll number, like that. Okay, so that is how we can pass data from the parent to the child. The final thing before we look at some examples is what are hooks. Okay, so the last topic related to this is related to hooks. So hooks are not something special, it's just a function which starts with the word use. Okay, so whenever we want to we will see any hooks, we will understand it's a hook based on when it starts with the word use. Okay, so like use state, use effect, use context, so all these things are hooks. Okay, so now let's understand some of the hooks that are popularly used. So these four hooks are popularly used, that is the use state, use effect, use context, and use ref. Okay, so the use state app is used to manage the state of the state of a functional component. Okay, now what is a state and all, I will show you when I use the code. Okay, then use effect is usually used when you want to handle side effects. Okay, so like for example, when your app loads, you want to do some uh, request, or you want to send some API request, right? So we can use effect. Okay, now use context is used to have a global state. Okay, usually when you use use state, it is for the state is only there available in the component. But if you want to have a app level global state, then that can be done with the help of use context. Then finally, use ref is when if you want uh, any DOM element to be accessed of a component, then you can use ref to access that. So let's understand the use state. Okay, now this is just an example of how use state is used. Okay, so because it's a hook, you have to import it first from the React library. So I will import it like this. Then you have to call this function use state with a default value. What is the initial value of the state? So when you call this function, it returns two things. First is the state, that is the count. Okay, now this you can name it anything you want. Here I am naming it as count, and there also comes a function which is used to change the count. Okay, change the state. Now one thing to remember is you cannot directly change the state with the variable that is there. Okay, so you cannot use this variable to change the state. You can only change the state with the help of this function. This is one thing you have to understand about state. So let's say I have a state called count with an initial value of 0. Okay, now I want to change the state to, I want to increment it by 1. So I cannot do count equal to 1. Okay, that is not allowed. You can only do set count, but use set count to change the count value. Okay, so only then this entire thing works. Okay, so now you can see this function. This is what we are going to build in some time. Okay, so we will see at that time how to do this. Next, let's look at use effect. Now use effect is usually used to uh, run some functions or some queries or some API calls when the particular component loads. Okay, so for example, here you can see when this joke component loads, you run this use effect command. Okay, so when this use effect command runs, it fetches a joke, a random joke, and then uses set joke, that is the state, to set the joke inside the state variable. Okay, and then it returns that joke. Simple. Okay, so that is how the use effect works. So whenever you want to do any um um on load or on when the component loads, you want to run a particular function or an API call, you do a fetch, you do a use effect hook. Okay, then there are other hooks also, like we have discussed the use ref and all those things. So that are advanced topics, you can try it on your own. Now the last thing before we jump into the demo is how to handle events. Okay, so events are nothing but anything that happens on the app, like you click on a button, then something should happen. So those are called as events. Okay, so those events are actually handled by something called as an event handler. So event handler is nothing but just a function defined inside the React app. Okay, so basically just look at it over here in this example. So this is a React component, and that is React component app, which has one function defined called handle click. Okay, so this function is defined, and this function only does one thing. It has an alert function, that's it. Okay, now how to activate this function, how, when will this become a handler? Okay, event handler, that is when you attach this to an event. Okay, so I'm attaching this to a button on click, and here I'm calling this function. Okay, so now these both things are attached. Okay, so now whenever someone clicks on this button, this function will be run, and when this function runs, the alert command will be executed. Okay, so that's how this works. Let's take another example. So if you want to uh, pass some parameters to the handler, then the things become slightly different. Okay, so if you want to pass some parameters, then obviously the things are the same. You can use, here we are using arrow function. You can use normal function also, but here we are using arrow function. So in this, the name parameter is passed and I'm alerting with the name. Okay, now this is fine, but the name of the function is greet. Now the problem is, how will I pass this parameter name? Okay, so if in the previous case you can see I'm just calling the handle click without any round brackets. Okay, because I didn't had any parameters to be passed. But here, since I have parameters to be passed, so to call this function you have to use the arrow function method. Okay, so this is mandatory. Whenever you want to pass some parameters, you have to use an arrow function. So you start with an arrow function and you call the greet, and then you pass the parameter. Let's look at the third example. So what if we want to handle the change of whenever some text changes, I want to update the view. Okay, so I create a state using use state, and in this input element, instead of on click, I'm using on change event, and with the on change event I am running this function set name with the uh, e dot target dot value. Okay, now what is this e? E is the event that is received on this on change event. So this will give you the event object. Now from the event object I'm getting the target. Target is nothing but this input element where the event is happening, and from that target I'm getting the value. So whatever is this value, that I'm passing to set name. Okay, that is my event use state function. So this name, now this set name will set the value inside this name. Now this name is getting displayed over here. Okay, so this means that whenever I change the input, it will also change the contents of the paragraph. So this is the third example. And the final example is if you want to handle the form submission, right? So here you can see how I can handle the form submission. So the first part is same as the previous example. You as soon as you change the email, that gets saved in the state using set email, and then you are on submission of the form. So whenever you click on the submit button, this on submit function will be called, and when this function is called, usually what you do is you send a fetch request to the backend API and save the data. Okay, but here since we are just testing, we are just uh, sending an alert that form submitted to this email. Okay, so that is how you can handle form submissions. So that is it for the theory part. Now let's look at one example of how to build a simple counter app using ReactJS. Okay, so we will use the wait method to do this. So let's begin. So first we will open our console and change our directory to desktop, and let's run the uh, wait command. Let's go to our wait and take this command and let's run it. Okay, so this should ask you, do you want to create a wait app? So I will say yes, and no, and npm install with npm, yes, Now, if you see in this, it has done the npm install also, so you don't have to do the third step. Okay, so let's just wait for it to create the React app, and you can see it is done and it has also started the app. Okay, so it created it and it also started it. So let's stop it for the time being. Okay, so we have stopped it. Now let's get inside the folder cd my app. Okay, and let's try to run it by our own, but before that let's open it in VS Code using code. Okay, so this is how my app looks like. Let me just increase the font. Okay, so this is how it looks like, and let's try to let me just close this and run it using the terminal, built-in terminal of VS Code, and I can do npm run dev to start the React app. Okay, so let me control click to open the app. So this is how it looks. So our React app is up and ready to run. Okay, so now let's look at the structure of this React app. So there are many files that are there. Okay, so you don't have to touch the node modules folder because that is where all the React library and everything is installed. Then this is the public folder where you will be storing all the assets like images and other things. We don't want to open that also. What we are interested in is the source folder. This is where our entire app is going to be there. Okay, so the thing that we are interested in is this file app.jsx. If you open this, you will see currently there is an app. Okay, so there is something, and you can see this is the app that is there. Okay, now we want to start fresh, so what we will do is we will remove everything from here. We will remove this, we don't want that. We will remove this, we don't want the state also. Okay, so we will remove this, and inside this let's remove everything from here. We don't want anything, and let's just say h1 and welcome. That's it. So that's the only thing I'm going to have. Now let's check that out, and you can see I'm getting this welcome message. Okay, now I want to create a React app which looks something like this. Okay, I've created a design over here. So there is a counter app we want to build with increment and decrement buttons. Okay, so I've already designed the UI, so I will use that. Let's go. This is the website uh, from where you can also get it. So this is the GitHub repository where I store all my simple UIs. So I will go inside the counter folder, and inside the index.html you can see this is the uh, code for the counter. Now, I'm not going to copy the entire thing. I just wanted the style first of all. Okay, I will copy the style and come over here, and you can see there is a app.css file that I've added. So I will take this, remove everything from here and paste this. Let's save that and let's check the output. So this is how it looks. Next, I will go back to my, and this is the code for the counter. Okay, so let's take that and let's put it inside our app. Okay, so let's take this, paste it over here. Okay, now When you take a HTML code and directly paste it over here, there will be few problems. Okay. The first problem is the class. Okay. Now just please understand that this is JSX. Okay. So actually I started with HTML. This was simple HTML. So when you copy an HTML into JSX, it doesn't convert directly into JSX. So what you have to do is whenever you copy and paste any HTML code into JSX, then whatever the class names are there, so these classes, that should be converted into, because class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, so that's why you cannot use class in JSX. So instead of that, you just have to name it as class name. Okay, so once you do this, then most of the problems are solved. Okay, another thing that you have to look into it is that there cannot be any dashes in the attributes. Okay, so any dashes in the attributes will also had to be changed. Other than that, let's say if you have a label, in case of label, you can there you usually use for, okay, in a label. Now for is also a reserved keyword in JavaScript, so again you cannot use for. Okay, so once this is done, I can save it and let's try it out, and you can see this is uh, the counter. Okay, I think I need to have a little bit of margin in the buttons. I can say margin of 1 EM so that it looks a bit separated. Okay, I think 1 EM is too much. Let's make it 0.5 EM. Perfect. So these are my buttons. Okay, this is my UI, simple UI that I've prepared. So if I click on this, it should decrement. If I click on this button, this should increment. Okay, so let's implement this. Right now, only the UI is set up, but rest of the things are still not working. Let's handle that. Okay, so first of all, let's do one thing. First, let us understand why do we require state. Okay, what is the need of state? So let's do one thing. Let's define a variable called let counter is equal to 2. Okay, so let's define a counter. Okay, now since we have a variable counter, now I can use it over here, and let's to use it, you just have to put a curly braces and then say counter. Okay, the name of the variable. So now if you see, I am getting the variable over here. Okay, now let's try to implement the increment and the decrement functions. Okay, now to do that, first let us define a function. Let's say count. Let's call it handle decrement. Okay, so I am creating a function called handle decrement. Okay, and sorry, not count, it should be const. I'm thinking of using an arrow function. Okay, so handle decrement, and here I'm going to do what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the counter and I'm going to do minus minus, that is the decrement. Okay, so now if you see, there is an error that is appearing. The handle decrement is declared but its value is never read. Okay, so let's handle that. So the reason why that error is coming, because I have created this but I have never used it. Okay, so let's attach it over here. So I will attach it on click event, and here I will call that function. So now you see that function, that error is gone. Okay. Similarly, I will also create a handle increment function that will be counter plus plus. Okay, and I will call this function on click on this button. Perfect. Okay, so both these things are done. Okay, now let's try to check whether this works or not. Okay, so if I click on this, so nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. Okay, so what is wrong with this? Okay, so let me do an inspect in the console. Okay, so let's do some console log. Console.log counter. Okay, so let's do this at both the places, here as well as here. Okay, let's check whether the counter variable is incrementing or not. Okay, so if I do subtract, you can see 1 is getting printed. Okay, so -1 -2, and if I do plus, it is increasing, but the value, this value is not getting changed. So what is wrong with this? Okay, so let's understand what is happening and why do we need state over here. Okay, so the problem is this variable, when it is rendered inside the JSX. Okay, so once it is rendered, then the changes are not monitored by JavaScript or by React. Okay, so usually any variable that is once rendered, any changes to the variable is not monitored by React. If you want the variable's value to be monitored and re-rendered into the view, then you have to use state. You normal variables doesn't work. Okay, now let's see how to do that. So instead of a simple variable, we have to define a const. Let's define a counter, comma set counter. Okay, so whenever we create this, we have to have a counter variable. Okay, any variable you can take, and you have to also have a function to set that. Okay, then you will use state. Okay, so use state, and as soon as I press enter, that is imported over here. Perfect. And I will start with a value of 0. Initially this will be 0. Okay, now once this happens, then what you have to do is whenever I want to, so now this will not work. Okay, the reason why this will not work is because you cannot change the state directly. Now if whenever you want to change the state, you will have to use this function. Okay, so how to do that? So I will just say counter, set counter is equal to the current value of the counter. I can get it from here, counter minus minus. Okay, or I can simply say counter the current value minus 1. Okay, okay, so this will uh, change the counter by 1. Similarly over here I will say counter plus 1, whatever is the current value of the counter plus 1. Okay, so that will update the counter. Now I don't need these two console logs. Okay, once this is done, my app must be complete. Let's try it out. So initially it is 0. If I do plus, it goes up. If I do minus, it comes down. Okay, so this is how I can create a simple counter app with the help of ReactJS. Okay, so this finishes with this particular chapter. Okay, we have created a simple counter app, and we have also seen some theory related to ReactJS. Let's do a quick revision of what we have done. So we started with the basics of React, how to install it, the CDN method, then the wait method that we use to actually create the app, then very important features of React, and we discussed all the features. And another important question is what is JSX, and how to write JSX and how JSX works, and the rules required to write JSX. Okay, then we saw some examples, and we also saw what are components and how components works and what are the types of components. Then finally we have seen an example of a functional component with how to pass data to functional components. Then we have seen React hooks and few of the React hooks with examples to two React hooks, that is use state and use effect. And finally, we have seen how to handle events. And at the end, we created a simple counter app. Okay, so that was it for today. Thank you, everyone.